ADAS to full autonomy is what we're going to talk about. You know, talking about Detroit, and go ahead, Carla, let's get your panel to head up this way. Center of Automotive Research is a well-known research information organization. Every year, there's a great event up in Traverse City, Michigan, where for many years the automakers have gathered to talk about things like internal combustion engines, drivetrains, et cetera. Now they're starting to talk about autonomous features, ADAS. So who better to bring this panel up here than Carla. Bailo is the president and CEO of Center of Automotive Research. Thank you, Carla, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
And Larry, my spouse is a left-handed golfer. This isn't deal breakers. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to host this wonderful panel this afternoon. We're going to talk about the shift from ADAS to full autonomy, and we've got a great breadth of panelists here to talk about so many different aspects. So first, from AARP, we have Kyle Rakow, who's the VP and National Director of Driver Safety. Welcome. Secondly, we have Kelly Funkhouser, Consumer Reports, Head of Autonomous Vehicle Technology Testing, and Diana Furchtgott-Roth, I hope I pronounced that okay, from the U.S. Department of Transportation, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology, and from Honda, Subai, Chief Engineer and Manager of Feasibility Study Department and Automobile Technology Research Division. So welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here on the panel. I want to start a little bit with ADAS. We're going to take the walk from ADAS to autonomous, and we'll sprinkle in some connectivity in there as well, because we know it all has to come together. But when we talk about ADAS, it's being deployed now all the way from what used to be, you know, the fairly premium luxury segments, now all the way through model lines. And so from that deployment, what have we learned? For example, from DOT, what have we learned in terms of maybe regulatory and all the manufacturers doing different things in terms of how these systems operate? And from seniors, you know, we have the silver tsunami, you know, coming to the nation. What is their perception? How do they like it? How does it help them? From an OEM perspective, is it really helping to reduce collisions or near misses? And then from Consumer Reports, do the customers like it? So in that order, why don't we start with Diana, and we'll go from there, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, we take this issue very, very seriously. Our team has rolled up its sleeves, and we've got to work. We are really focused on the connectivity, on making sure that all the technology is able to function and is able to be rolled out. We're really determined and focused to see this through. And there are just so many examples now of different kinds of vehicles coming on the road. We are very focused on trying to preserve the 5.9 band of spectrum for vehicle connectivity, the 75 megahertz that can be used both for vehicles being connected and for CV to X, vehicle to infrastructure, where you have buses going along and changing the traffic lights if they're crowded buses, not changing the traffic lights if they're not, where you can have emergency vehicles, ambulances going down the street and changing the traffic lights, where we can reduce that 37,000 deaths by not being able to have those cars hit each other when, in other circumstances, they would have done so. And I'd like to acknowledge Professor Alan Kornhauser of Princeton University, who's sitting there. And he, in his smart driving conferences every year, one of the things he said is, if we can just get the car to brake before it hits something, that would be such an advantage. Even if we don't get as far in the next few years of completely driverless automobiles, if we can just get the cars with drivers in them to stop before they hit something, we will have made immense progress. We're really focused on reducing deaths, reducing injuries on the road. And I welcome all your input, all your suggestions for anything that we should be doing better or we could be doing better.
Great. And how about from the senior viewpoint? How is this technology helping, or is it even proving to be more of a distraction? What are your findings so far?
Yeah, interesting question. So again, my role is focused in the driver safety space, where we have the nation's largest driver safety course focused on the 50 plus, and we've been spending a lot of time evolving our curriculum and programs focused on technology, both the technology within vehicles, but then the technology to request or get a ride as well. And I think a lot of the work that we're seeing, I guess firstly through survey work, is that the aging population, they don't want anything to do with getting into an autonomous vehicle. And so we realize that we have a lot of work to do. And it's one of the reasons why we're focused on educating in the now. And this belief that educating on the advancement of technologies that exist in our research proven to be preventing crashes and in vehicles today is where we need to start. And we firmly believe that continued education along this evolution of technology advancement will increase that trust barrier, if you will, with technology, and also hopefully increase the likelihood of adoption when the autonomous vehicles are more safely readily available.
Yeah, I just gave a talk to a group of GM retirees, so we're talking people probably in their 70s and 80s, and I was surprised how many said, the car's beeping at me, I don't understand, I don't get it, I just want to turn it off and make it stop. So on that note...
I just want to say that even though these older people might not want to get in the autonomous vehicles, I have a 93-year-old father. I would love to have an autonomous vehicle that would come and pick him up.
Absolutely.
So he would not be a danger to himself or to other drivers.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about that in a little bit, because most people will outlive their driver's license by 10 years, right? So from Consumers Reports standpoint, what are you getting in terms of feedback from customers about the advanced driver avoidance systems?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that people are reporting all these beeping, just annoyances in their car. And I actually, one of the presentations that is one of my favorites to do is called What's That Beep? Because it seems that all of these technologies out there are just adding more beeps to the car. Mm-hmm. So we definitely hear that there's a lot more annoyances and potentially distractions coming from some of these systems that are actually meant to help you. So we do hear that some of these may be a hindrance rather than a help, particularly those that don't work very well or don't meet the expectations or mental model of the driver. And so, we look at how the systems aren't all created equal, and how they vary, even the same system, how it's implemented on a different maker model. There are a lot of variations there as to how the systems perform.
Do you see that there's a difference between the haptics or the beeping in terms of customer preference, or I guess less hate?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of research done in the medical field on beeps, and it's hard to tell two different beeps apart from each other, and they're not a great warning. But we do hear that the haptic type of feedback is preferred, especially over visual and audible, because it doesn't embarrass them as a driver when they have passengers in the car, or it doesn't annoy them as much. They're much more tolerant of a silent haptic feedback or a visual, although haptic is a much better warning for something that's imminent.
Okay. And Sue, from an OEM perspective, is ADAS systems really helping to prevent collisions or prevent near misses, and have you begun to analyze that kind of impact?
We believe so. We have a vision of a collision-free society, which is shared widely with the broad industry. And we've applied a variety of ADAS features since 2000. And we're probably among one of the few manufacturers that will be applying a rich set of ADAS features to all vehicles, not just top grade, but all entire line. And saying all that, we also understand there are limitations of onboard sensing system. So I've worked with Carla and many others on exploring new sensing capability, not only extending the capability, but also may be helpful to eliminate some of the near misses or maybe over conservative beepings, for lack of a better word. connectivity, V2X, whether it's a direct communication or through the cloud. We see that as a great potential to enhance ADAS. And some of these technologies will migrate into the full automation later on.
Thanks. So then let's talk about what do we need to do to really pave the way for this morphing into autonomous vehicles through connectivity and autonomous. What about infrastructure? What about testing, development, certification? What about customer training? And how are we going to actually license people, or are we going to in an autonomous vehicle? But perhaps I'll let anybody who wants to tackle that question first.
Well, I'll take a shot. We are part of the SAE Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium, working with several major manufacturers and other stakeholders to develop testing standards recommendations for the industry to consider to adapt. And that's a great step towards a common goal, even though each company may have their own flavor of implementation. But if we can follow the similar process, the consumer can expect the system behave a similar way. I think that reduces confusion and further push the technology for wider adoption.
And from DOT perspective,
Yeah.
what
Well, it's a very, very
actions are you taking to pave the way? I know you've got a big leadership role in that regard.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very interesting where in 2020 we might be seeing level 3 driving, where we have hands off, feet off, eyes off, but brain on. And in a sense, that's more complicated than either level 0, where you do everything, or level 5, where we don't do anything. And it'll just be very interesting to see those interactions. We are really focused on safety. We want to get the technology out there. Secretary Elaine Chao is tech neutral, but she wants to focus on the safety and make sure that the technology can get out there. And a certain amount of regulatory reform is needed to make sure, for example, that when we have an autonomous vehicle, it does not still have to have side mirrors because there isn't a driver who's going to use those side mirrors. So we're just trying to encourage the different systems to move forward as best we can.
So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on this question. And it seems that there's the full autonomy, the level 5 type of vehicles that everyone's trying to achieve. But a lot of the technology that we're seeing being developed for those are trickling into consumer available vehicles right now. And we're kind of at this tipping point right now where we're seeing these longitudinal and lateral control systems, so the adaptive cruise controls and the lane keeping systems perform pretty well. And so those systems then kind of teeter on the difference between a level 1, level 2, and level 3. And particularly when those systems have multiple different settings that you can personalize in the vehicle. So if you have multiple systems, perhaps 3, we have a road departure mitigation. I'm going to call out some Hondas here. We have a road departure mitigation system and a lane keeping system, and perhaps even a third type of lane centering or something system. All of those have settings in the menus. And so it's really complicated for drivers to understand how those systems work from an engineering standpoint, which they shouldn't have to understand, and how they behave dependent on which settings they're set to. And the tricky part comes when, maybe you have one of the systems off and one of those has the lowest setting. It's not very conservative. It's kind of just going to kick in right at the last second. And then one of the other systems is in its most conservative state. Mm-hmm. All those permutations of the different systems can make the car behave vastly different. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing now is if you turn on maybe all of those systems to the most conservative setting, a lot of these cars are almost at the state of being perhaps a level 3, where they're doing a really good job at maintaining the center of the lane and the speed. And so, people are being tricked into this quasi-level 3 scenario where the car does a lot of the work for them and it performs really well, but they still need to be paying attention. So coming back to the different perspective is, maybe we'll see these level 3 systems out there. I feel that we already have those types of systems because it's, dependent upon one word in the owner's manual that may change, whether your mind needs to be on or whether your hands need to be on. But the reality is that these systems do perform well and allow the drivers to, almost fall into this level 3 category unknowingly. And so my fear is that the one word in the owner's manual or the safety driver in a level 4 is being self-certified, what we heard earlier, by these companies. And there isn't really regulation or any oversight in determining how companies market these technologies and what level they market them as in terms of what the reality is for the driver inside that vehicle.
So what can we do from a driver safety and training standpoint to allow people to understand really the capabilities so that they're not lulled into complacency or over-trust? And then my next question is going to be, and I'll let everybody answer it, but I want to hear your answer first. I'm going to say, is level 3 even possible? But let me hear what you're thinking in terms of how we're going to train people to think differently, more like an airplane pilot, as Larry just alluded to, versus the way we train people today.
Yeah, certainly. And I think maybe as an extension of many of your comments, Kelly, it's the reason why we created Smart Driver Tech. Again, we have a small little booth out there that begins to introduce it, but it's a 90-minute in-person workshop that focuses on the top 9 safety technologies for mature drivers. And we built that program jointly with the Hartford and leverage a lot of their research from their Center for Mature Market Excellence. But I think it's education like Smart Driver Tech that is going to, again, start to eliminate these trust barriers, increase awareness and education. And I think another component that we've been trying to do with Smart Driver Tech, as we're seeing the relevance of it through just the wait list trying to get into this workshop, is working closer with OEMs. We've started to deploy this education in dealerships across the country, but I think there's a lot more work to be done there. And so I'd like to lean a little bit more heavily within the OEM space to partner with them from an education standpoint on these technologies as they advance.
I just want to follow up with one comment, and I wasn't here for the earlier sessions. I was at a different conference, but I did hear that driver education was brought up, and I have a little bit different view on that. Driver education is important, but experience is more important. And second to that, I think the onus is on the manufacturers to not have to rely on AARP or someone else to go and train drivers how to use these systems. That should be on the manufacturers for making what the system is doing, the expectations clear to the drivers once they're in the vehicle, as well as how they use the system needs to be done in the vehicle and less from the driver's training. So driver training is important, but I think that we're trying to tackle a side effect rather than the problem.
So Stu, let's have a little fun with that.
It's really very complicated because say you are trained to drive a level 3 car, but then you also in your household have a level 0 car. Then moving between those two is also very difficult because say you're backing up in your level 3 car and it goes beep, 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 beep when you're about to hit your garage, but then you switch to your level 0 car and you back up and everything's fine, no beeping, and all of a sudden you hear crash. So, we were talking about wives and husbands, and one story from my honeymoon is when we went to Europe, and I'm originally from England, I know how to drive a stick shift, I know how to drive on the left side of the road. Well, my husband being American, he didn't know how to drive a stick shift. He'd never driven one before. He'd never driven on the left side of the road, so all of a sudden I was a much better driver than he and had to take over a lot more of the driving. Well, by the end of that honeymoon, he had learned how to drive a stick shift. I should say that, because he got tired of me zipping around in the little Ford Escort that we had at the time. But for the foreseeable future, we're going to have a lot of different kinds of vehicles, and people are going to have to know how to use those. So when I hear parents saying, well, I would never let my child drive a car that did not have a blind spot warning, but then what if that child gets in a car that does not have that technology? Yeah. It's almost as though you're saying the car has to do the driving and your mind doesn't have to worry about that anymore, but you could be in a different kind of vehicle. So you have to be careful of that also.
So I know, Sue, you are eager to talk, but I want to push back just a little bit on that. I think, first of all, the ship has already sailed. And, my earlier comments were, we're already at this potentially quasi-level 3 state right now.
Yeah. But people still need to drive level 0. They still need to know how to drive
Right,
the
and
other
it's even
kinds.
more important because within the same car, you can adjust all those settings and change it from a
Yes.
level 0, a level 1, a level 2, and a level
Exactly.
3. So the education comes around what those features can do. But again, that really needs to be relayed inside the vehicle.
Yeah, so if the onus is on the OEM, is what's being suggested, in terms of training, what I want to talk about is how is engineering changing, to think more about that human-machine interface and think more about the customer expectation. How are OEMs tackling that? I mean, we could talk about the dealers, and we need to keep them longer in the dealer, but most people, by the time they pick out a car and go through the financing, they're so tired of being in the dealer, they just want to go. So, we can talk about that training process separately, but how has it changed the fundamental way we do design the vehicles?
I think fundamentally, safety is Honda's top priority. We cannot sell a vehicle or a device that have safety hazard that we couldn't address to the best we can. And thinking of the title of this panel, From ADAS to Reality of Full Autonomy, I think several speakers in the morning also addressed that this road is actually longer than we thought, and people are coming back to the reality. Developing safety technology takes decades of effort, from airbag to coming back to the V2X direct communication. That's a 10-some-year-old technology, and it's still being developed, being validated. And those are time-taking for a good reason. For safety, it has to be very carefully designed and validated. And that has never changed, at least in Honda, for any safety system. And for V2X, especially for cooperative system, on the consumer side of view, they may not know these extra sensing capability can tell vehicle 200 to 400 meters ahead or behind you around the corner. But the system would be able to give them a comfort level of now the car is able to be proactive instead of reacting, and could potentially eliminating a potential danger even before that danger getting formed. However, the challenge on the cooperative system is all the other cars will need to have the similar capability. That kind of throw the problem partially to the DOT side, the regulation, including FCC, that I know DOT is closely talking with, protecting the spectrum, have a clean medium for the message to exchange to enhance safety capability. And OEMs already have worked together in the past decades to mature the standards, and we're ready to apply that to the real world. But the danger here is spectrum protection is a top up on the list.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no OEM is going to put anything out on the roadways till it's 100% safe. However we define safe someday. So let's go to the DOT for a minute. What's the most important threat to vehicle connectivity in the future of AVs?
Well, we need to we need to preserve the 75 megahertz of spectrum in the 5.9 band for vehicle technology. And there are so many exciting things we can be doing with that. I mean, from truck platooning to intelligent transportation systems to vehicles that will not hit each other. So it's really important to show the world that we are doing this. We have Japan talking about with Toyota deploying possibly in 2021 or 2022. We have Europe that has reserved the same band of spectrum for connected vehicle technology. And we have many deployments with roadside units for intelligent transportation systems all over the country. We're doing a lot in Utah. We're doing a lot in New York. So these are all very, very exciting developments. And we're working very closely with the FCC to make sure that these technologies are rolled out. One thing I want to say is also, I think it's remarkable to me how we managed to change people's behavior in so many ways, that when I was growing up, we thought nothing of being in the car without any seat belts. Now kids know to put on seat belts. They tell their parents to put on seat belts, and it's really a wonderful development. Kind of along with the no littering. You know, kids will do all kinds of things, but they won't throw trash on the ground. So we can make people drive safer. We can persuade them to have safer behavior and take more responsibility for themselves. And that's really important, as well as the airbags and the other wonderful technologies that the OEMs are developing in their vehicles.
What are some of the threats from your view, Sue, from an OEM perspective to get AVs out on the roadways?
Well, I think, again, the reality of AV migrating from ADAS, different levels, and gradually adding capability, ensure that's safe, not just because it's a kind of a trendy word, everyone start to potentially over-promising the capability. As a manufacturer, we need to be very responsible and making sure the safety is addressed first, which will naturally take longer. And that's just the nature of the product.
Any other comments on hindrances or?
Well, it's really exciting to see some of the technologies being developed in our university transportation centers. We have 37 university transportation centers all over the country.
Yes.
And I was visiting Virginia Tech last month, and there was a vehicle that had a camera that was both front-facing on the road and facing the driver. And the object of this camera was for teens, so that it would record the teen's behavior when the teen was not driving carefully. And Virginia Tech has worked out that if you can get a teen to drive safely for the first 6 months, that teen is probably going to continue in that pattern. So knowing that, and teens apparently drive safer when there's an adult in the car. So this camera was supposed to take the place of the adult in the car, and when there was unsafe driving behavior, a recording of this would be sent to the teen's parent. So that's very exciting new technology that can be used. And one of my colleagues actually said that she has OnStar in her cars. And when her kids were learning to drive, she said, well, you know, OnStar is recording everything that you do. And I can check and see what speed you've gone and where you've gone and how fast you've been braking. Well, these kids believed her, and their driving was a lot better as a result. And at the other end of the spectrum, I've been speaking to researchers from the University of Nebraska Medical Center who are using this technology of seeing how the drivers drive in the car to identify Alzheimer's before it happens. And these researchers have shown that some kind of erratic driving behavior can be matched with the plaque in the brain, giving them an advance warning of when an individual has Alzheimer's or is starting to develop Alzheimer's. And this is not always at the same age, so you can tell ahead of time. So that's really exciting too.
Yeah, it's interesting how the lines are kind of being blurred, keeping people safe, but getting a little too personal, right?
I mean, at both
so
ends
that's
of
going to
the
have to be
game.
mitigated as we go through this ramp into
Or
autonomy.
it can maybe help reduce accidents. So there's two ways of looking at it. Yes, maybe it's an invasion of privacy. Is this a privacy thing that, maybe we can have people sign up for it so that it is not an undue invasion of privacy? Or they can get a discount in their auto insurance.
So I noticed that I had a red light blinking here, and it says 0. So I think I can keep asking questions all day, but I think we're going to open it up to the audience for a few questions.
Want to bring our microphones out if anybody, we have a question right over here. I have a very important question. Diana, how did your family allow you to marry someone that couldn't drive a manual?
They weren't from Detroit, were they?
Well, there's four letters, L-O-V-E.
All right, we'll let that one go.
Hi, Kelly. I had a question for you. What is your stance on companies that use terms like pilot or autopilot or co-pilot for what are essentially level 2 advanced driver assist features where drivers are expected to be engaged and monitoring the situation 100% of the time? And then how can we expect consumers to trust these building blocks of autonomous technology when companies push arguably misleading marketing?
Great question. Arguably, pilot is a overselling term. We don't necessarily agree that they should be marketed as such. They potentially overpromise and undersell and change the mental model and expectations of the driver. My take, though, is that, that may sell the vehicle, but the in-vehicle experience is actually a little bit more important than what they call it, particularly vehicles that, may call something in advertising or in their owner's manual or on their website a term, and you get in the car and it's something different. So instead of focusing on all of these terms, which I think is a big issue that we are addressing and working with other consumer advocacy organizations to, kind of put an end to or redirect the conversation. But the experience once you're in the vehicle is, paramount to how you view the system. So you can go read on Consumer Reports or somewhere else about what these systems are supposed to do or what they don't do. But as soon as you get in the car and experience it, now your mental model is completely about your experience. And so, again, that's why it's most important to convey all of the usability, what it can and can't do, when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it, to the driver in the vehicle at that time.
And to add to that, Kelly, though, some of these systems are pretty darn good and work just fine until they don't.
Oh, yeah.
So
you got it.
Yeah.
So exactly. And so that's why I'm saying, we're kind of at this potentially quasi level 3, which I don't, necessarily agree with binning automation in those SAE levels. That's a conversation for earlier and later potentially.
Ongoing.
But that's right. Some of these systems do a really good job a lot of the time, and that's where it gets scary. So some of the systems that are, have a design philosophy where they're not as good. It's not because they can't keep you in the center of the lane, but some of these manufacturers are specifically designing to not do a really good job so that they keep the driver in the loop, so the driver isn't relying on them and falling asleep at the wheel.
Diana mentioned about getting in and out of vehicles that have certain capabilities. I think people still even have that right now, whether their intelligent cruise is on or off. Maybe they got used to or lulled into the distance separation. All of a sudden they're running up against the car behind them and they realize they didn't hit resume or something like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't turn off. I'm going to be a little provocative. I don't know if level 3 is ever going to be possible, is my opinion, because in general, if somebody is distracted, research has shown it takes 4 to 28 plus seconds for them to get unabsorbed. And by that time, clearly something terrible has happened. So since we've seen already out in real world issues, I'm just not sure how we're ever going to train people to be like a pilot.
So I'm going to answer that one too, just because that research on the 28 seconds came out of University of Utah from my good friend while I was in grad school. And so, that is really, really important. And so it's more important to make sure that the drivers maintain awareness and don't have that option to check out. And some of these better performing systems that are doing a good job of the driving task, may allow drivers to become complacent, which are the scarier ones than the ones that don't perform as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, right over here. Yes.
Hi, this is for Diana and the other panel. Diana, what human factors research is DOT currently undertaking or supporting or anticipating? So we've got some reference point for the human factors, the point Carla just made in terms of what the human can interact at these different levels. That could be a reference point for the industry to do the ConOps and architectures from, to do the technology.
We're doing a lot of work on human factors for NHTSA, our National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. So NHTSA's commissioning a lot of our work at Volpe on human factors. So not just how does the car work in practice, but how do people interact with the car when it comes to be particularly adverse circumstances. So that's going on at our center in Volpe, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Then there's other work going on in other modes, such as our motor carrier administration. There's work going on with, that's one reason we're changing the hours of service rules. So if someone wants to take a break, then it doesn't count against their time later on. We're doing a lot of work in the aviation area also, as you've no doubt read about in the newspaper. So there's a lot of work going on in this. And one small suggestion I would like to see in rental car vehicles, which are often new vehicles that people drive for the first time, is to have an owner's manual there. It seems like owner's manuals have completely disappeared. I normally drive my car is a 2005 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and most of the cars when I rent are 2018, 2019. It's very difficult to see how these things actually work, and there's no user's manual in them anymore. You can't just stop and look at an index and say, well, why is this beeping, or beep for this, whatever it is, and it won't tell you.
But again, I mean, a rental car is the great example, right? When I fly into an airport and get into a rental car, the last thing I want to do is sit there in the parking lot and read an owner's manual, especially at night, right? So that's not a practical solution. And so again, that needs to be conveyed to the driver without the owner's manual.
Yeah, it's just,
Okay,
it's a little bit difficult.
We have time for one more.
This question is also for Diane, and others may jump in. So you mentioned V2X. So V2X has been around for a while, right? But it hasn't really taken off in any significant way. So I'm just wondering if government mandate is required for it to promote that more. I'm just curious for your thoughts.
Right. Secretary Chow is tech neutral. We've seen a lot of mistakes with governments mandating technology that isn't very good. She wants to let the best technology win. So whatever technology consumers want to buy and producers want to make, that is the one that she thinks that people should be choosing. Also, technology is evolving. If you mandate one kind of technology, 5 years later, there might be a completely different kind of technology. So we want to stay away from mandates, and there are many, many kinds of technologies that people use every day that are not mandated. People use all these different kinds of apps on their cell phones now. Some people can't get around without WhatsApp or Google Maps or Waze. None of these have been mandated. People have chosen to use them. And we feel it's the same kind of thing with other kinds of technologies. We are not in a position to mandate.
I think for safety-related technology that needs interoperability, we believe mandate would definitely help to broaden the adaptation. The Europeans have already announced continuing their deployment in dedicated short-range communication, or DSRC, and there are deployment happening in Japan, and soon will be happening in Korea. And in the US, there's already deployment too by a major OEM. And there's also state DOTs that have a lot of pilot program. Honda's working with Ohio DOT very closely to pilot deploy the dedicated short-range systems for safety and mobility use. And this technology, aside from the spectrum that's being challenged by other industry, another critical point is the unity of the technology itself. Think of let's say the Wi-Fi in this, it's a .11 something, ABCD. These are specific technology protocols. Even though you may have different devices and manufacturers implemented differently, but they all follow the same technology. For any technology that needs interoperability for cooperative purpose, neutral or picking two or three is like sitting in the same room speaking different languages. Then you need to add the translators. Your efficiency immediately drops to a fraction of what it's designed to be. So, I mean, I think neutral is a word that somehow I think there's a limitation on how we can use that word in an interoperability-related technology. We certainly hope there's a unity in the industry to deploy one well-validated technology that's for the public safety benefit.
And from a consumer perspective, we're technology neutral as well, but we're not safety neutral.
Right.
There is a clear technology that has existed for decades that works, that could be implemented right now, that has the potential to save lives every single day instead of waiting. When people come to me and ask if they should, buy a new car, I say, yes, let me tell you about all the safety benefits. And guess what? The next year model is probably going to have more safety. The next one after that, probably more safety. But I don't want them to wait to get the 3 years from now model when they could get an upgrade now and start benefiting today.
Yeah. Well, you have cell phones like the iPhone 11 can talk to my old Marbell landline, can talk to an old BlackBerry phone, can talk to an iPhone 3. So we do manage to, in other areas, we manage to have these technologies work together. and they have to be compatible with each other. We're not going to be stopping at the latest iteration of DSRC or CV to X. So we need to make sure that our technologies do continue to talk to each other and work with each other, because we're not going to have technology standing still. That's why it's so important that all of you are here, working on these different iterations and pushing out the envelope.
Right.
And it's more important also to have independent third-party testing of the efficacy of that interoperability and working together as well.
And even dedicated short range, that is evolving. There are next generation protocol being defined right now, and the standard will be ready quicker than the typical IEEE process. These are being addressed by the industry. And again, reiterating Kelly's point, instead of waiting for something that might address similar capability, we have something right now ready to be used. And certainly a regulation would be a great help.
Okay, I hate to put an end to it, but unfortunately we are out of time. So how about a nice thank you to
Thank you.
our panelists. And Carla, thank you very much.
So nice to meet you.